When are we live?
You're live.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the South Star Classroom. I am your co-host, Omar Yanan, and with us as always, the beard of knowledge, the beard of wisdom, the beard of exalted excellence, the beard of beards is really where I'm going at. Mr. David Castillo, brother, how you doing today, man?
I am good, man. We are transitioning into summer over here. We got my son's middle school graduation coming up on Thursday.
Ooh.
and then we're moving on to high school.
So, real quick question, man. We do 8th grade commencements as well. When did that become a thing? Like, we didn't have an 8th grade commencement growing up. We didn't have Jack. We got like a balloon.
I did.
And literally like a kick in the butt being like, welcome to high school, kid.
No, I mean, the only reason I know that I had one for, back in the day when you graduated elementary, we had a ceremony, and middle school as well. And the reason I know is because I gave speeches at both. I was like selected to give a speech at each one. So that's why I remember. I was not selected to give a speech at my high school graduation.
Oh, yeah. I did. Well,
yeah.
What happened in between elementary and middle that you were the commencement speaker, and then that kind of just dropped off the wayside there?
I burned out, man. Burned out.
I burned out. Middle school was the height of your academic prowess.
That was my peak years, man. Yeah.
That's funny, man. Well, I mean, you're back leading schools, running schools, leading other people to run schools. I'm really glad to hear it. Sadly, Dr. Charles Cole couldn't be with us today. He is doing a mountain of excellent work, and we're here to support him through that. And as always, Jubilee, man, we hope to see her soon. And we're going to run this show, just the two of us today. So for those of us in the audience, we'd love to hear from you on today's topic. I think it's going to be kind of a stirring one. I think you guys are going to have a lot of, or our audience is going to have a lot to say on this one. Before that, man, it is hot as hell in El Paso. It's already in the 100 degrees out here. I don't know if anyone else is feeling it. It is well into summer. So, I mean, it is to the point where I'm telling staff members and everybody else, man, like, listen, like, just dress like Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, man. Shorts and T-shirts and Vans. We got to dress Southern California style. It is too damn hot for anything else out there.
Are you running summer school?
We're running a modified summer school. We couldn't do as much as we wanted to do because of financial concerns, and that's a totally different show about what the hell is going on here in Texas, and vouchers and funding being kind of held hostage by the governor, which, man, all true statements. It's nuts. In fact, the governor of Kentucky was on a really well publicized press conference the other day, talking explicitly about, like, without talking explicitly about voucher systems, but calling out Texas, essentially being like, I'm here to fix public education. I'm not here to hold hostage public education and suffocate it and drown it in underfunding so it underperforms in order to, like, prove a voucher system works. And that was a direct shot at Governor Abbott and what's going on here in Texas, which is like, look, man, you want to pass vouchers, like, cool, like, let the legislative process do it, but to hold back funding from hardworking teachers and administrators and holding it hostage is, I mean, tantamount to some real serious Third Reich kind of shit, man. I love that.
I saw something in. So Texas is a huge state, right? The second or the first or second largest in the country. You got millions of kids in school, and without getting into detail, there was an incident with an educator at a school at one of the ISDs in the Houston area. I'm sure you saw this. They posted some kind of inappropriate content, from their classroom. Wasn't involving a kid, but it was a teacher doing stuff in a public school. and that was it. And everybody just started being like, this is why we need school choice. I'm like, one teacher in a massive system, right? They didn't say it after Uvalde, but now you have a teacher that's doing some questionable, not questionable. It was clearly inappropriate and unethical. But I'm like, they jump on these things so quickly. They're like, this is why we need school choice. It's wild.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because like this like confluence of stuff is coming at me, meaning like, dude, I was watching this thing where Ted Koppel was having a conversation with Sean Hannity. So for our audience, Ted Koppel ran, was it ABC Nightly News, or one of the most sought after nightly news programs where news was more of a public service. For the kids in the audience who may be with us, and this is not super off topic to what we discussed, but a bit of a tangent. The news, ladies and gentlemen, was not a money-making endeavor. Like CNN did not exist, Fox didn't exist. It used to be a public service to say, hey, as a network, we're going to lose money on the news, but we're losing money because it's a public service to inform the American public, the United States public, on what is going on in the world. And CNN and Fox really changed the trajectory. I think CNN changed it, and like, we don't need news 24/7, but they became like the first 24/7 news channel. That was Ted Turner out of Georgia who did that. And I think really Fox News changed the landscape entirely, because I got to tell you, like, Fox News, despite that it's called Fox News, I don't know if anyone notices, they have to put a disclaimer before Sean Hannity, before Bill O'Reilly when he was on Fox, before Tucker Carlson when he was on Fox, that those shows were opinion-based and not news-based. But it was such a small, tiny, indiscriminate disclaimer that they really changed the landscape. And Ted Koppel, in this conversation with Sean Hannity is a very kind of right-wing news guy. I don't want to call it news, opinion show on Fox that a lot of people watch. You cannot give it away. And he's got a ludicrously high audience. But Ted Koppel, who is this like very respected newsman, is talking to Sean Hannity, who runs an opinion show. And Ted Koppel just basically said, like, look, I hand it to you because you guys single-handedly changed news from facts into ideologue. You are America's lead ideologue. You're not sharing facts. What you're sharing is incendiary opinion. And this is kind of what, like, this in line turns into what you were just saying, David, which is you've got people online seeing one incident from one school and becoming an ideologue and screaming for, school choice or vouchers based on one incident, as opposed to looking at the statistical reality of the facts of what is going on. And I got to tell you, dude, like, for every incident where you see a fight in a public school, like, you see drugs in private schools, like, hard. For every incident that you see, a child getting into misconduct in public schools, you see a lawyer protecting a child in a private school. And this is what we're talking about here. It's like you're conflating issues. And, I think that people jump all over things that they see on the internet now without asking the serious questions of, like, what's behind it? Why is this happening? And I think that's like the loss of, like, critical thinking in America, right? Like, it's why critical thinking is part of the frame and structure of El Paso Leadership Academy, which is just taking a moment and pause and being like, what is the goal of them showing us this? And what are they trying to achieve here? And what's the story behind it? Yo, oh my goodness. What?
Hi.
What a perfect segue. Where are you coming to us from? You look so comfortable.
Thank you. I'm at like one of my new favorite spots called True Food Kitchen in Annapolis. So I'm trying to like wrap up my day, wrap up my meetings. Didn't make it home. So here I am.
All right.
Dude, Annapolis, so pretty. I love Annapolis. One of the prettiest cities in America.
For sure.
I mean, how cool. I'm so excited that you're joining us. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. What are you guys talking about?
I mean, we just kind of wrapped up a whole thing about school choice, the governor of Texas kind of holding Texas hostage.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Did I go out? Or did you?
There we go. Got that fixed.
He's good. Yeah, good.
Perfect.
And talking about like this really interesting interview between Ted Koppel and Sean Hannity about how, news has changed in the United States, where it's not news about facts anymore like it used to be during like Ted Koppel's day or Walter Cronkite's day, how it's just become basically opinion sharing and ideologue. And that's how we get ourselves into situations where like the public gets really heated about something without asking critical questions about what happened. And then that was going to be our segue into our show. But we got to first take a step back and ask you, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderfully. The sun is shining. School is almost over, and I'm not sure who's more excited, the kids or me, so that I can just not get any school messengers. I don't want any school messengers for 2 months.
Yeah.
And that's that. All is well. I'm sure that you can relate, David.
Yeah, they send one, and then they're like, "Oh, correction! Oh, another correction." It was like, just stop. We use Parent Square. Just stop.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, I'm really glad that there's communication, but like such thing as over communication under. So
yeah. All right.
So let's jump in to our topic today. So, if we had done a cold open as our co-host does, Dr. Charles Cole, it would have been something to the tune of like kids showing up to interviews with their parents, unprepared to get into the workplace. Yeah. What the hell is going on with Gen Z? We'll see you on the other side. That is happening today.
There it is.
That was great. We have to play that back for
Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Charles Cole. But that is the topic for today, ladies and gentlemen. We have some really interesting statistical information to fly at you. And look, I was having this conversation today with my CFO about people in the organization, about being like, do they not understand that like money doesn't grow on trees? That was the statement I said. How did I turn into the begrudging old man? I don't feel old. I don't feel like I'm the old man. I don't feel like I'm old man Rivers saying things like money doesn't grow on trees. But like, when did we become the responsible adults? Because let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I know that the younger generations are like, you just old. Like, well, they're okay boomers, except for the fun fact that like everything I see online is like, don't mess with Gen X. It's like, don't. Like, don't mess with Castillo and I and the Gen X, man. And don't mess with well-prepared millennials who have a deep understanding of responsibility and work, which I see in a lot of people at EPLA. But these kids, Jubilee, these Gen Z kids, these were supposed to be like the savior, man. It was like, well, the millennials are out to lunch, but these Gen Z kids, they care about politics. They care about issues. They care about making the world a great place. Never mind that despite the fact that they are environmentalists, that they all have Bitcoin, which is destroying our economy. So it turns out they're also hypocrites. But dude, I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the stuff that we're going to fly at you today, and I know we're going to be able to share some screens, is incredible. Here's the quick key finding. We're finding that 38% of employers, 38, that's a lot. So you're talking about more than a third of employers out there are 100% avoid hiring recent college graduates. That's your Gen Z kids. Avoiding hiring those recent college graduates in favor of older employees. 1 in 5 employers have had a recent college graduate bring a parent to a job interview. We're going to throw up these statistics, and I'm just kind of laying down the facts. I want you to think about that. 20% of kids.
Before we do that, yeah, let's look at some definitions here of what we're talking about. Right.
Thank you,
so this is like who
yes,
and when and why.
Yes.
Right. So this is obviously You can see what's on the screen there. Oh, hold on. Sorry. It'll come back. Give me 1 second there. Okay. So we have here some definitions for our audience. You can see.
I appreciate this.
Going back to what they call the baby boomers. This is like when they were born, between 46 and 64. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Millennials, 81 to 96. And then Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. Right?
Very good.
Does that help?
Okay. It does. It helps immensely. So, I mean, I think that squarely puts you and me, David, in the Gen X category. I've always considered myself deep Gen X. And I think that puts, power to the boomers, dude. And that puts our co-host in the millennial category.
Yes.
So what we're finding out here, and look, there's a lot of talk amongst the generations, and we want to get into it with our audience. We want to get into it today. We just want to be out there. I was a huge advocate of Gen Z, and I thought Gen Z was going to be this like really inflamed in a positive way generation that got involved in public policy, got involved in politics. We're seeing that they're getting involved, but not very well educated or very well informed before they decide to go out there and get in their involvement. And for all this shit talk about Gen Z, I started doing just a bit of, looking into it, being like, man, is this all BS? And then I stumbled on this, and I had to kind of quickly do like a fact checking to be like, where do these statistics come from? Are they real?
Yeah.
Do they have validity? And I got to tell you, like, yeah, man, like there was a solid investigative work that was done through intelligent.com. And it was just pretty simple, man. They did kind of like a standard solid statistical input of asking, hundreds, if not thousands of employers, like, just tell us about what's going on with your Gen Z kids, just so that we have a grasp of what these kids are coming to the table with. And we're scrolling through stuff, but I want to take a quick step and say right here, like, this is where the rubber starts hitting the road. If you're starting to look at the screen, and for those of us listening on podcast, what we're looking at is a graph, a bar graph, going from left to right that says action employers will take to avoid hiring recent college graduates. So what our employers are doing is we're finding that about 60% of employers are increasing benefits for older employees to keep them there so that they're not having to hire younger employees, which, by the way, guys, that is huge, because it's oftentimes that employers will try to, move younger folks into positions because they're effectively cheaper because they have less experience. And here we're seeing that the benefits of paying a Gen Z less are now benefits at all, that they're finding that the benefits of having older folks there are greatly outweighing the payroll costs of having younger employers come in. Paying higher salaries to older employees, almost 60%. Almost at the 55 mark is allowing older employees to work remote and hybrid schedules. Almost at a little bit above the 45% mark, you're seeing hire an older employee for a position that they're overqualified for. These are things that just weren't happening in the workplace at all. And again, you want to scroll back. It's because what we're seeing is that within the statistical survey, and I think the bringing the parent to the job interview was like the one that I was like the most shocked about, right? But like 58% of recent college graduates are unprepared for the workforce, and nearly half of employers have had to fire a recent college graduate. So what we're looking at is a huge question for our audience, for you all, which is like, as Dr. Cole would say, what the hell is going on with Gen Z? But more importantly, here's the question. Is it the college's responsibility to teach these skill sets And more importantly, why did previous generations teach them, but not coming into Gen Z? So I'll ask that again. Like, if it's Gen Z that's coming in extremely underprepared for job and job interviews, what is it about the previous generations that made them more prepared? And maybe what's going on with Gen Z that's lacking preparation? Because I do want to ask the college question, but I ain't putting the responsibility of this on the college just yet. So thoughts?
Interesting question. I mean, I'd like to know more about the mindset. How I think about just mindset, and if the Gen Z folks had more of a mindset that like job schmob, like I am learning everything I need to learn from YouTube, from TikTok,
Mm,
and that was my parents' thing, like to say you're gonna grow up and you're gonna need to know how to hold a job, right? So it's just like, what if I would never thought that I would need to hold a 9 to 5 job the traditional way, like my parents did and their parents. I'm an entrepreneur, right? Then you get into the market and you realize, entrepreneurship is harder than any 9 to 5 job, and you probably need to get a job too so you can buy bread and pay your rent, right? So you go to the job market unwillingly and unprepared because you possibly didn't think you were going to need it. And I guess my other question is just around like, I wonder what sectors, right? Is this the business sector, right? Is this like finance? Is this human resources? Is it the medical field? Is it education? Like, where are these, what jobs are these stats representing? Because I feel like in the education sector, they're grabbing people. Like you got Teach for America folks, you got these people straight out of college, and they're like, yes, please bring us, come on, and we'll train you, we'll get you together. We don't care that you brought your mom to the interview, that's fine. We have some great PD and we're going to get you together. Whereas other sectors may be like, we don't got time for that. If you screw up, Miss Sally is going to die because you couldn't
right.
properly,
Yeah.
you
I
know
mean, however, like, man,
so
I got to say, like, this is some overwhelming statistics, right? Like we're saying, like over half of these people, you're right. Like, it's interesting to see what sectors they're coming from, and where the statistical information is coming from. But I got to say, like, it doesn't, regardless of what sector it's coming from, like, it doesn't bode well, because what you're finding is like a huge disconnect amongst like this generation and older generations in terms of like what the expectations are. So like, David, you had just highlighted something, and like, in fact, I was kind of chatting to
Yeah.
you. I'd love for you to show kind of
Oh yeah. Yep.
that
Not this
chart.
one.
Yeah.
This
And then I
one?
wanted you to
This
kind
one?
of scroll all the way back up. It was the chart after the one that you previously showed about employers. Basically the one that like kids are struggling.
This one right here. Right here.
Keep going. Yeah, like that's one. Yeah. So check
Yep.
this out. Like during job interviews, employers say recent college graduates. So like for our listeners online, like almost 55%. This is during job interviews, employers say recent college graduates have struggled with eye contact, like almost 55%. Asked for unreasonable compensation at 50%. Yeah, like straight up, dude, like all the time, dude. All the time. I've never done this job before, but I learned organizational strategy from some makeshift college in Chicago, and I've never actually done anything in my life that's actually practiced these skills, but I want $100,000. That's like, cool. Talk, dude.
Yeah.
Dressed inappropriately. Are they showing up like Spicoli? Like, I wonder what dressed inappropriately means, right? Like, are they showing up in like flip flops and like
probably.
board shorts? Like some dude in board shorts and flip flops and a tank top, looking like they just got out of like a beach volleyball competition, just showing up being like, yeah, I'm here for the job. Yeah. Used inappropriate language. That one's shocking. Like for Gen Z, who's all about their trigger warnings and all about sensitivity, like for them to be using inappropriate language, that's funny.
I'm not surprised at all. I just feel like
Yeah. Oh,
the pendulum swings from one side to another, right? Like, let's think about church, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, right? And I go to a church that's like, come as you are, don't worry about the dress code, right? Like that became a thing, like in the past 10 years, right? That in more environments that would require more formal wear, it's like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, God he just cares about your heart. And I mean, I do agree with that, right? But I think that sometimes these things fold over also into like professional atmospheres where it's like, we don't care about, we just want to know if you can get these projects done. So what if every other word you say is profanity and you wear flip-flops like to board meetings with all the CEOs? You're the brightest one in here, right? So I just think the pendulum just, swings. And I think part of what like preserves this thing that it seems like we're trying to preserve is having that middle ground and like talking about appropriateness, talking about time and place, talking about perception, because as much as we want to pretend that it doesn't exist and it doesn't matter, that people still look at that, right? And it's the last thing I'll say. I showed up to this was just last year. This is me, and I'm not a Gen Zer. I came to a virtual interview. I hadn't been to one in years. It's for a leadership coaching position. And I had no sleeves on, just like how I was now. It was a hot summer day. And I ran onto this thing and didn't have on like a blazer or anything. And the woman that I got the job, right, of course, or the contract. But she was like, when I spoke to her one-on-one, she's like, I just want to let you know that people really do still receive people here with their eyes. So next time, if someone's asking you to lead anything or whatever, throw a blazer on. She's like, I'm not bothered by it, but someone else may be, because this district is still pretty traditional in a sense, so.
Yeah. I mean, that's honest feedback, right? I think with just going back to this first question, I want to even back up and I think, colleges definitely should have a role to play. I think, middle school and high school, definitely. But I think the biggest issue with, some of this data that we're looking at is the fact that, like, if you are a young person, where do you learn these skills? You can learn them in a number of different places, but the best place to learn them is actually in the workforce. And what we know about Gen Z is that en masse, they've started their entry into the workforce much later than any other generation in American history, right? So they don't have that exposure. Better educated, in school longer, but not necessarily, but do not have the early exposure to the actual world at work and in professional settings and even unprofessional settings. Sometimes you learn from working in a warehouse, I think that the average, the median age that people are starting work is growing. It's getting pushed up. I mean, I think when I was, and I think there's some of it is like, regulations. You can only be 16 or 18 to work in certain states. But, I hate to say it, but back in my day, when you were like 13, 14, you could start working. And that's when I started working. And you learn a lot of these things that we're looking at in this one chart on the job, and you learn it when you're young, right? Some people get it from their home. Church plays a role in many communities, but I think the biggest thing that we're seeing here is just a general lack of exposure. And I experienced it as a head of school principal, where and this is a while ago. This is probably even like 15 years ago, where I'm having to wrap my head around particular things. And I'm like, why is this person behaving like this? And you sit back and you're like, this is their actual first regular full-time job, even though they've done 4 years in college and they did another 3 years at Stanford or Harvard. This is their first actual full-time job. And they're already in their early 20s, right? And so it helped to explain a lot of the behaviors that I was seeing. And you could label it however you want to label it, but I think that's the biggest issue, and it's hard to really make up for that, because those are your formative years, right? When you're a teenager, when you're learning about the world, learning how to interact with the world, and if you don't have that real world exposure, it's going to be hard for these things to come naturally.
I don't disagree. Like, frankly, I think both of your comments were ludicrously insightful, right? And I think it's kind of picking away at this like iceberg of what exactly is different about Gen Z than the other generations in terms of their attitudes. And it's a really good postulate about both the reconvening of what's conventional as opposed to like in church as to like when people got jobs. But like, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up what I know what Dr. Cole would say right now. Like, it's the goddamn cell phones. It's the cell phones. It's these kids looking at the cell phones, talking through the cell phone, using inappropriate language on the cell phone. Why do you think they're showing up to a job interview saying inappropriate language when they're out here using inappropriate language on the phone? So to put that into context for our team, I want to ask, I got to play the role.
You're channeling him really well. He'd be proud.
If he's not here right now. But like, it's a really good question in terms of like, look, I don't want to blame everything on the phone, but I do want to create a quick connection here and saying, if we look at those statistics, and I'm going to chime in with something else later about like that book, Homo Sapiens, again, really great book, or Sapiens, right? But like struggle with eye contact, dressed inappropriately, inappropriate language. Well, when you're in the digital world, no one's seeing how you're dressing. And the conventions of dressing may have changed, right? You're in a gig economy. And when a gig economy, like you're driving an Uber around doing TaskRabbit, like all that matters is like, did it show up on time? Not how are you dressed? Kind of giving a lot of deference to the comments you both made. Inappropriate language. Like, yeah, dude, like what has like playing Fortnite and being in the anonymity of the digital age provided, but a safe place for inappropriate language. So just before we jump into everything else, like I can't help but say, this is what Cole would say. What would you guys say to that?
I would say, there is some truth to that for sure. But I also think it is about, I guess bowling. I'll use bowling as an example, right? You put the gutters up so that the ball doesn't go off the side and actually, hits the target. And I think parents are that, you know what I mean? Like my mom, and she always tunes in when you see her name pop across the street, Georgia Hanson, she's in higher education. 10 years ago, she started saying, why are these college kids sending emails with IDK, YOU spelled with the letter U? Like she started saying, right? But who was being, standing against that and be like, no, like we get it. There's a space for informal language and there's a space for formal language. When you study other languages, Latin-based languages or whatever, they said this is informal. This is how you address someone who you know, family member, friend, and this is how you address someone who you do not know, who is a colleague, who is a supervisor, right? So I think things got conflated in our world without having parents and educators to push back against that. And we're like, no, there's a time and a place. This is how you draft an email to a potential employer. This is how you can write to your friends. You don't put IDK, GTOFOH or whatever that is in an email to like an employer. So I think, so that's what I would say. Yes, it's cell phones, but my sons do not have a problem with holding eye contact. I teach them that every single time they want to put their head down or answer me, I'm like, look me in my eye. I said, if you, in our culture, right, because that's not true everywhere, but in our American culture, eye contact means something and it's a sign of respect. And when you're going into contract or agreement with someone and you shake their hand, you give them eye contact, it's just as important as a handshake. I'm teaching my sons that, and I don't accept anything else from them when they're speaking to me or anyone else. So when I introduce them to people, they give a firm handshake and they give eye contact. But that's what I taught, and no one in my family will accept anything else, right? So I think there is a familial thing here as well.
Now I'm afraid to stop making eye contact with you all. Got me scared.
The eyes are the portal to the face.
I believe
as quoted by Christopher.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Well,
I think the other. So
yes,
you mentioned the rise of the gig economy, which I think is one big thing or change. I talked about extended years in education, meaning a later start into the the workforce. We also have to look at, if we're talking specifically about Gen Z, the 2008, economic kind of crisis that we had in this country, and how that extended, or limited possibilities or options for, to gain employment. We talked about the advancements in technology, working from home, kind of a different sort of mindset around work, and then just the cultural shift. Like, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing, but there has been a cultural shift where, now we have this thing called, we call it like live work balance, right? Everybody's like, you can't work too hard, right? And we never really have been that way until just recently. And I think people, maybe in larger numbers, the younger generations, might be like, I'm not going to take that job, even though it might be a great job with a good salary, but it might be too hard. And so, doing the whole like self-care thing. Like, we never talked about self-care, right? You just went out and like killed yourself. Not, you know what I'm saying?
You mean like worked incredibly hard, not actually.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Starting a charter school network. Yeah. How about that?
I almost did kill myself starting that thing, dude. I think I'm still burned out from that. It does,
you are, I'll tell you that.
It does raise like an interesting question about, some of this has to do with like the parents. Some of this has to do with like, I think a change in what has happened with jobs, what has happened with the digital community. And I like that we had all this conversation, because I feel as if the employers are saying, hey, we're not hiring college grads because college grads don't have it. And this is what this is kind of the topic. So like Alonzo said, let's be realistic. If you're going to go into a profession, maybe you require more years of experience by the time that you graduate. And that's what the study is, Alonzo. It's saying a lot of these employers are holding on to older employees and waiting for people to be significantly older and having these skill sets, which is bringing about the question of why aren't these college graduates prepared for the real world? And does that put the burden of responsibility on the college? And I think that's I don't want to belabor that question, but it is a question nonetheless of like, is that a college's responsibility to teach those things?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's their responsibility, but I do think that if we recognize that there is a particular need, for any one given generation, I think colleges can play a role. I think here is, and we don't really have any data to support this, but the shift towards like work-based learning that we see in many American high school systems could be promising, right? Getting young people out, as early as the 9th grade, but definitely by the 11th grade into like internship-based learning. So now you actually know what it means to like show up on time, be professional, dress professional, all the things that we're seeing in this particular piece, about managing yourself in the workspace, right? I think the shift towards work-based learning, some people call it linked learning. It's different in different states. There's a big push for it in California. And I think that could potentially be promising, but ultimately, I think if it's not like really taught and reinforced in the home, it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. Go back up to that graph really quick. And then Jubilee, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I agree with what David said. I told you guys about my experience in high school, my co-op experience, my senior year, 1 week in school, the next week at work. And that's right. So like it was life-changing because we did get that explicit instruction. I think if the K-12, education spectrum is about preparing kids for the real world, like how many educators do we know have said that we're trying to get you ready for the real world? Okay. Well, how does the curriculum align to what these children are going to be doing or responsible for doing when they get to the real world. Where's the financial literacy and the budgeting? Where are the interview prep questions and skills? Like none of this stuff is in there, right? And so the co-op program for me was my first at bat at doing this stuff, figuring out what is appropriate where, well, how to answer questions, how to, you know, leverage your strengths, how to balance, how to have that, you know, work-life balance, even though we didn't call it that. But it was about, hey, you're going to be full-time employee 1 week, and you're still going to have assignments due when you get back next week, and you're still going to be responsible for all of it. How are you going to do it? So I think that is really promising. I think that should be something that's across the board. When it was in my school, it was very selective, and only a small number of us got to do it because they weren't able to roll it out for all the kids in my school. But I think that was my first opportunity. By the time I got to college, then I was able to implement the skill sets I learned in high school. You know, so college could play a role, but I think that by the time a child steps on a college campus, they should have already had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good segue into like our second and even our final question, right? So our second question is like, what responsibilities do K through 12 and higher ed have in creating that skill set? And, you know, you alluded to it, David alluded to it, even with the internship component. But it's also the last question of like, all right, like who should claim responsibility for teaching these things? And what can the education system do about it? Because like, I would arguably say if we were having this show 30 years ago, be like, this is the parents' responsibility. If someone said that to me, I would turn back around and be like, it's our responsibility in the school system, because I'm looking at my parents who are single parents working 2 to 3 jobs, don't have as much time as I would love them to have with their kids. And they're getting prepared for a different reality. A lot of my parents are, you know, working class. A lot of these realities, and like, dude, working class, like show up late. Dude, you're in the working class and you show up late, like you're fired. Like there's a bazillion people who want this job. You show up late, like later here. But like if you're talking about like white collar job and middle class jobs, like the inability to show up on time, you may see that as like, what's the big deal? But like if you're a teacher and you're showing up 5 minutes late, that's 5 minutes of students being unattended. That's 5 minutes of like essentially someone having to cover for you and look after those kids, because it is the state's responsibility to have children supervised from the minute they get in to the minute that they get out. So what you've done has been ludicrously inconsiderate, put someone else out of their job for 5 to 10 minutes, and then almost performed an illegal act. So it begs the question, like, whose responsibility is it, and what can, like, you know, the education system do something about?
You want to go, Jubilee?
I mean, I'm happy.
Yeah, because I've got to have. Yeah,
Say
the question one more time, then I've got to jump.
Yeah, it's really the last question, which is like, whose responsibility is it to teach this, and what can the education system do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essentially, you know, what I was just saying, work it into the curriculum and make it something that's mandatory. I mean, we have so many things in the curriculum. It's like, why are kids learning this? You know, and when my sons come home asking me those questions, why are we learning? I can't give them an answer because I have no idea, right? And I think we've had this on our other shows before. We've kind of brought up the fact that some of what we are teaching kids is very antiquated. It's not aligned anywhere near, you know, what our children need now. We haven't adjusted the curriculum to reflect their needs now based on, you know, what's relevant. So I really think, you know, and, you know, Charles says I can never give a straight answer, but whatever, Charles. But I do think it's a partnership. I think it's the parents. I think it's the school, you know, and I think that any place where young people are going, you can become an ally, and you can become a force to support them in becoming stronger in whatever the skill set is. But I think the majority of it, even more than the parents, it falls on the school. Because I mean, my dad could have sat, or my mom could have sat me down at the table like, let's do a mock interview. But unless I have a place to really practice that and carry that out, you know, so I think it's a partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's a partnership too. And it's interesting. I'm just thinking about it now. We have, we even have like early education standards, right? That kind of link to transitional kindergarten. We have elementary standards that map to middle school standards, and we have high school standards that map to middle school standards. So there's like a continuum, but what we don't do well is, you know, especially in the high school years, is, you know, map out what is it going to look like to prepare Omar or Jubilee or Charles for whatever they're going to do. It might be the military, it might be college, it might be directly into the world of work. And there's, if you did a Venn diagram, there's probably about 70%, you know, shared kind of characteristics, traits, skills that people need just to be successful in any of those realms, right? And again, I don't think it should be like a course that you take. I think it should be mandatory, grade level curriculum. You know, maybe I mean, we used to have like, you know, different courses that they've gotten away with in the past, you know, like home economics and this and that and other types of classes. But I mean, I think we need to return to that. And maybe one entry point is through the work-based initiatives that we see. But I definitely think K-12 plays a role and should play a bigger role, primarily at the high school level. Yeah, all you have to do is open dialogue, like these people did the study that we're looking at. Bring in CEOs, bringing in hiring managers into the high schools and have them talk with young people about what it's going to take to be successful in a job, you know, in 2024, right? Those are important connections. And I think, you know, if we're not doing it in the high school level, it's I don't know if it's malpractice, but it's definitely it's not the most ethical thing.
Jubilee?
Yeah.
No, agreed. Definitely agreed. Again, a partnership for all of us to come to the table and say, we need to change this. We need to upgrade. Beyonce has a song that's called Upgrade You. We need to upgrade. And I think, like you said, it's not malpractice, but I do think it's negligence if we have these children for 12 years out of their life on this continuum, and they leave us without these skills under their belt. Then, like, what are we doing? And I know there's a bunch of variables, but I'm talking about the kid that comes to school, whose parents are relatively supportive, show up for open school and all the things. I'm not talking about, you know, students who are truants and all that. I'm saying for the kid that starts, a very happy 4 or 5 year old and goes through the continuum. It's like, again, if we're looking at the whole child, what is it that we're expecting them to exit the system having? And how does that represent us as a system, as a nation? Right. And like, if we don't know, let's look at other nations. I am sure that there's some other nation that probably has a 13-year-old that's ready to run for president. Like, what are we doing if we're saying that we are global citizens who are competitive? Like, that's where I am with it. So it's bigger than just the job interviews, but moreover, like how we show up in the world. And I'm hopping. I love you guys. I'll see you next week.
It's good to see you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Yeah. So I want to bring up a couple things and address some things that my boy Alonzo was talking about. On one end, you made a comment, Alonzo, and I appreciate it immensely. Like, old ways sometimes leave out opportunities for growth. The newer generation may see things clear, but aren't allowed to shine because employers rather hire older generation. Let me be honest about something really clear, because while I think that you bring up a valid point, let me be the old man in the room about this ideology. The first is that, like, human beings are human beings. The inability to commit eye contact, the inability to speak clearly, I don't care what generation you're in, like, we are built with millions of years of evolution in our systems. The way that we react to things, whether they be consciously or mostly subconsciously, is the discussion that I think pervades a ton of social media, but particularly all this, like, you know, interesting red pill, blue pill shit that I see on the media these days. And like, look, forget about that for a second and think about this. I walk into a room, I have confidence, I'm able to commit eye contact, I'm able to have a conversation, I'm able to generate ideas with someone. Then someone else walks into a room, they're looking down at the floor, they're speaking mousily like this. I don't care what you are or how open-minded you are, nowhere in your ability as a human being is going to give that quiet person the benefit of the doubt over the confident person who commits eye contact. Why? Because it's millions of years of evolution that's built into our cognitive system. Again, shout out to the book Sapiens that really clarifies all this, but it's just the way we're built. And if that's the way we're built, This is what my mom would say all the time. And like mama said, these are my magic shoes. Mama said they take me anywhere. But like these older generations are the ones that are hiring. And if Gen Z has the loss of ability to be like, what do I understand about them and how they do things and what they care about, you're losing part of the responsibility that Gen Z doesn't take, which is it's their responsibility to understand me. First off, like if if this were the 1980s, like good luck with that, because that's a radical shift from the 1980s, which is like, I'm the employer, you're the one trying to get a job, you conform to everything that we ask you to do. I, as an employer, I, as a CEO, have really, since the moment I started as a manager, evolved immensely on, man, I got to meet people halfway. I got to understand millennials. I got to understand Gen Z, because the more I understand them and their style, the better we can work with each other, the better that we can manage. But for me, it's a very halfway thing, because if you don't meet me halfway, like, then it's all on me. You're not taking any responsibility. You're not taking any action. It's all on me to figure you out, but not anything on you to figure me out. Then what that shows to me is like insane entitlement and laziness. And I don't want it in our organization. And I'll never have it in our organization, period. Because unless you're able to meet someone halfway and you're putting the responsibility on somebody else, that just pings at all of my like imbalance and justice metrics. Call me a Libra, call me a human. But like, that's some serious bullshit to say that it's somebody else's responsibility. And I'm not saying that's what Alonzo's saying, not at all. I'm saying in this hypothetical for Gen Z kids that put all the responsibility on somebody else. Like, nah, dude, understand your audience. Understand what it is that they need to do, because then that's the ability to shine. It's like, you know, I think it's like Murphy's Law. If you can't beat them, join them. I'm always for Peter's Law. If you can't beat them, join them, then beat them. Get into those realities, right? And like in talking about like real life skills, I'm with you 1,000%, Alonzo, because like shit, man, we did some of that stuff even in my world geography class that you were a part of, like getting up and speaking, committing eye contact, handshakes, understanding how people work. Can that be learned through like old school woodshop class or mechanics class? Maybe. I think it's more to the tune of understanding things like, you know, if you came to EPLA, you would engage in a class every single Friday called the leadership class. One exercise you'd have in that leadership class is something called circle counter circle. And this is just an example. So you have one circle, and the kids that are standing in that circle are not facing inwards, they're facing outwards, if you can imagine that. Then you have a circle around those kids that are facing inwards. So the circle inside is facing the child from the circle who's facing, or the circle that's on the inside that's facing outward is facing a kid. And then basically you turn on music and it's like a cakewalk, right? Like one circle walks in a counterclockwise direction, the other circle walks in a clockwise direction. You stop the music, you stop, and the first exercise is commit eye contact for 10 seconds without saying a word. Dude, if you ever want to watch some really funny stuff, dude, do that with your kids in your school. It is a hoot, because like these kids have never done this before. So it's the most awkward demonstration of middle school, or they're just like looking like their eyes are huge and they're like trying to not crack up, and they're all like petrified and scared. They can't commit the eye contact, but that's just the beginning of it. Just stop and make eye contact for 10 to 15 seconds. Then you play the music and you see this huge rush of relief over like every single kid. Then you stop the music again, and it's like shake hands, make eye contact, hold eye contact for 15 seconds. What I'm getting at is that I understand this because I didn't make the assumptions that these skill sets were going to be taught at home. And I didn't make the assumptions that a college was going to teach this. I just accepted responsibility that our K-12 system needs a huge revamping, and that these skill sets matter to people. Because Alonzo, like, trust me, man, if you were the hiring manager and some kid came in with a wet handshake, you know, I'm talking about the wet fish handshake, where it's like, you know, they're trying out for French Parliament, and they give you one of these like cold things, and it looks like you're supposed to like kiss their hand instead of shake their hand, and they're looking down at the floor and they can't commit eye contact with you, and you're trying to have a conversation with them and they're giving weird responses with inappropriate language. Like, I'd love to hear how open-minded you would be to be like, yeah, that's the kid that I'm going to hire. People are people, and people are going to make decisions based on how they feel a lot of the times rather than just. So in wrapping up, what closing thoughts do you guys have? And Alonzo, I'd love to hear from you, man.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about some of what might be the underlying forces that have kind of created this current situation, and looking at some of the data around what employers are saying, and some of the issues that they're seeing with younger workers, Gen Z in particular. But I also, going back to Alonso's earlier point, I do think it's, I wouldn't call it a negotiation, but just as we are asking and trying to help young people to understand, what the expectations are for the professional world, the world at work, the adult world. I do believe that the adult world, the world at work, corporations do have a responsibility to kind of, they can't be static, right? They have to change also and learn, because each generation is going to bring different things to the table. And so I do think being flexible. I mean, there's obviously limitations on both sides, right? But when you when you see data that says that at least in this study, these people overwhelmingly are saying that they prefer older workers compared to younger workers, like, that's a big issue that has to be addressed, right? And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. It's definitely not what when I looked at the data, it's actually the opposite of what I thought was happening in the world right now. But, at least for this study, that's what it says. And it was pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. And I think it just brings up a very interesting issue, because the responsibility is always going to be beholden on the school. That's just my take on it, right? Like, we could have audience members that it's like, that's the parents' responsibility. Cool. That's, the job's responsibility, because, hey, we had jobs and we learned how to do those things. And like, I'm with you. And I think like both you and Jubilee brought up working in high school, which I think is an absolute imperative. Like, man, I'm so Gen X in like believing that like you kind of need to get the crap kicked out of you. Like, really. And I don't mean that like physically, like in a fight. I mean, like, the real world is really tough. It is really tough. And for everyone who thinks that the real world is playing by the rules and is fair, it's not. And to learn not just the rules, but how to navigate how complex the situation is, man, I think it's totally beholden on the schools to give a real insight into what kids are going to need to be successful out there, because these Gen Z kids walk in with like a very interesting perspective of what the world is like. And I'm just sitting here waiting for like the shoe to drop to be like, well, when is it your time to get the shit kicked out of you into a reality that everyone else has faced? And I'm like, Gen X, bro, that shit kicking is necessary. Yeah, absolutely necessary. And like, I got this shit kicked out of me, and that's a necessary life lesson, period. And it's like, why do we need a shit kicking? It's like, because expectations don't meet reality. And like, dude, if you go into therapy, that is the very first thing that you're going to learn in therapy. False expectations lead to ludicrous disappointments.
There you go.
Expectations. Period. Without having a conversation about it with the other party. For all of yous that are looking for some relationship advice, I would talk about your expectations that have not been discussed, because the other person's not a mind reader. And this is the clash. The expectations of Gen Z are not meeting the realities of these employers. And therein comes the reality break for a lot of these Gen Z kids. and they're as anxious as it is already. So for me, I'd say, man, I'd love to take the responsibility, and we are, of teaching these skill sets, getting these kids significantly more understanding of it so that the ass kicking happens in high school with training wheels where we can support you through it, so that by the time you get out of like high school or college, you're good to go.
Yep.
On that note, David, you got anything else? We're at time, brother.
We're good. No, I'm good, man. Thank you.
All right. Well, then on behalf of Dr. Charles Cole, Jubilee Ransom, and Mr. Beard of Knowledge, David Castillo, I'm Omar Yanar. This is the South Star Classroom, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you next week, everybody. Peace.
Peace.